Hi everyone. Welcome to another installment of Terrifying Trios. Our theme this time is life. As in, how far will people go to stay alive, or to save the lives of those they love? Whose life has value? And what does a life that comes after death look like? Content warning. The following movies and books contain graphic violence, including murder by gunshot wound, the violent deaths of children, also by gunshot wound. Specifically, in two of these stories, a black boy is shot and killed by police. Electrocution that returns a corpse to life. Body horror, including brain removal and body theft. Death caused by great physical strength. The theft of body parts, and more. Viewer and reader discretion is advised. Also, spoilers ahead, so proceed with caution if you want to watch these films or read the books discussed without knowing how things turn out. Our first film this month is The Angry Black Girl and Her Monster. Vicaria was only 8 years old when she heard her mother's heart stop, following a fatal gunshot wound. Years later, her older brother Chris dies in a hail of bullets. But things are different this time. Now a brilliant teenager, Vicaria is convinced that death can be cured. Following his death, Vicaria stole Chris's body before it could be taken away. In a condemned building she uses as her lab, Vicaria prepares to bring Chris back to life, using other bodies to rebuild his. In her neighborhood, people sometimes call her the mad scientist, but that's because of her knowledge of science. They don't realize that she's also the body snatcher, the person blamed for recent disappearances of corpses in the area. Though Vicaria excels in school, an argument with her science teacher, who insists on mispronouncing Vicaria's name, results in security being called, and Vicaria's glasses are broken when she is knocked to the floor. They are mended with tape after this, and one lens is cracked for the rest of the film. Though struggling with grief after the loss of his wife and son, and working 2 jobs to get by, Vicaria's father Donald is always in her corner, attending a meeting with the science teacher at school and admonishing the woman to not act like a child while teaching children. He wants to be there for his daughter, and Vicaria sees how he's struggling, often covering her father with a blanket at night after he falls asleep in their living room. One night, after seeing a neighbor boy die after being shot by police, the failed attempts by paramedics to revive him convince Vicaria to use the local high-voltage power station to resurrect Chris. And it works. Chris has been dead long enough that his appearance is disturbing, but Vicaria takes his swollen hand and tries to reassure him. She wants to show Chris who killed him, and who's responsible for getting their grieving father hooked on drugs. Unfortunately, things don't go as planned. Vicaria and Chris leave the lab, and Vicaria finds drugs in Curtis's car. Curtis is a drug dealer who's in the same gang that Chris belonged to. Curtis catches Vicaria, though, and Chris attacks him, nearly killing him. Horrified, Vicaria runs home. The next day, Vicaria is summoned to a meeting with Kango, leader of the gang. Someone saw her with Curtis's assailant the night before, and now Curtis is in the hospital, clinging to life. Obviously, Vicaria won't say that the person with her the night before was Chris. Suspicious, Kango orders Vicaria to start cutting drugs for him. Furious, Vicaria only agrees when Kango's enforcer, Jamal, threatens her with a machete. As Vicaria spends time with her extended family, including Aisha, Chris's pregnant girlfriend, she notices that Jada, a young girl who looks up to Vicaria, and who's learning to read, claims to have a new friend named Chris. As Jada recites the alphabet, Vicaria swears she can hear Chris's voice, too. Then she notices a gap in the wall, which opens into the unit next door. It's currently empty, and the door is nailed shut. After a confrontation with Kango, who gloats about how Vicaria's father Donald begged for drugs when he was first mourning Chris, Vicaria leaves, and Jamal, at Kango's instruction, follows her. She goes into the vacant unit next to where Aisha and her family live, and after making her way through the dark with a flashlight, she is jump-scared by Jada, who's looking through the gap from her side of the wall. Vicaria explains that she's looking for Chris, and Jada suggests that maybe he's waiting for her. Then something moves in the dark hall behind her. Vicaria investigates, and we soon see that Chris has attacked Jamal, but he's still alive. Back in bed at home, after a nightmare about Chris, Vicaria's father reassures her. She saw Chris at the window and tells Donald she saw someone outside, but manages to convince him that he doesn't need to go out and check. At this point, Vicaria is clearly uncertain about what to do about Chris. Before dinner at Aisha's house, she tells Jada not to talk to Chris because he's dangerous, but Jada insists he's not. Aisha and Vicaria, though friends, have different ideas about how to make the world a better place. While Vicaria believes that death can be cured through science, Aisha believes that this won't matter as long as black lives are so undervalued in our society. Though the family enjoys a meal, mostly without incident, laughing as they share a happy memory of Chris, the hole in the wall looms large. Vicaria knows that Chris is nearby, and she's painfully aware that she needs to do something. We next see Chris on his own, standing outside under flashing lights. When asked by the police what he's doing, he haltingly explains that he's going to see his father. The police attempt to handcuff him, and when he breaks the handcuffs, he is shot multiple times. But then he gets up and kills the cop who tried to kill him. At this point, it bears noting that while Chris has reacted with violence in several scenes, he does not initiate these encounters. He only fights back when he is called a monster or physically attacked. And this says something about how much of Chris remains. Did he come back wrong? Or is the way that the world treats young black men in the wrong? Things come to a head when Vicaria goes to talk to Kango and sees him helping a sick older woman. At this point, Jamal reports that Curtis has died in the hospital and that he wishes to exact revenge on Vicaria. Meanwhile, back at Vicaria and her father's home, Donald confronts what he thinks must be a burglar, only to find Chris sitting on the bed in his room. Both of these scenes parallel each other, while Kango tells Jamal not to hurt Vicaria, either because he wants to protect her, feeling guilty about how Chris died, or because he worries that the older woman in the next room will overhear. Then Jamal strikes Kango with his machete, and Vicaria runs home. While this is happening, Donald's joy at having his son back turns to horror when he sees how Chris looks now, and he insists that, "You're not my son." They grapple, and Chris strangles his father before shouting in anguish. Vicaria comes home to find her father dead and sobs, sinking down onto the floor and saying, "I'm sorry," to her father or Chris, or perhaps both, until she is found by Jamal. Still armed with the machete, Jamal approaches, only to be slowed down by an injured Kango. Jamal tosses him aside, and then hears Chris breathing in the next room. As Vicaria and Kango watch in horror, Chris uses Jamal's machete to split Jamal's mouth and head open. The two manage to lock themselves in a room down the hall, and Vicaria finally explains how she brought Chris back from the dead. Kango says that they need to kill it. Him, Vicaria insists, though she soon acknowledges that yes, the creature that was or is her brother will kill them if they don't act. Kango says, "You only cheat death," and Vicaria realizes that yes, he does blame himself for Chris being killed, and he tells her to flee out a window so she can get what she needs from her lab. Vicaria makes it to the lab and finds Jada there with a bloody handprint on her face. Using the helmet-like device that Kango retrieved from her room before being fatally injured by Chris, Vicaria returns to the high-voltage power station and is chased by Chris, who follows her back to the lab. She turns on the power and Chris cries out in agony. As he dies for a second time, we see tears spill from one eye as Vicaria tells Jada that Chris wasn't a monster. He was treated like one when he came back, and that's why he acted the way he did. Next, Jada reveals that Chris came to see his family earlier that night, and they attacked him. At first, Vicaria is heartbroken to see that Aisha and the others are dead. Jada says, "But they were just here." And Vicaria, convinced that they are still fresh, uses her machine one more time to revive Aisha. Aisha wakes up, and she is clearly still herself. She weeps with relief when she feels that the baby she's carrying is also alive. His name, we learn, is going to be Victor. Chris wanted to name his son after his sister, Vicaria. Aisha asks after the rest of the family, and Vicaria, with tears in her eyes, explains, "They'll be here soon." This film is a haunting and heartfelt retelling of Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, which is what Vicaria has written on her notebook containing the details of her plan to resurrect Chris. Mary Shelley is thanked in the credits, and the writer and director of this film, Bomani J. Story, had the following to say about growing up watching monster movies with his older sister. Quote, "We rarely, if ever, saw ones that tackled issues that were important to us, with people who looked like us. It has been a dream of mine to bring an adaptation of Frankenstein to film, through the black lens, with a lead character as smart as my sister." End quote. Reviews of this film sometimes complain about how Vicaria reacts to Chris with fear after his return, But I would argue that resurrection in this story is a lot like death. Knowing it as a theory or eventuality is different than seeing the reality. And of course Vicaria is scared. She's lost her mother and her brother, and on some level, I think she knows that Aisha is right. Even if she can cure death, building a world in which black lives are valued will be an altogether different challenge. I rate this movie 3 electrical surges out of 4. Our next movie this month is Get Out. Photographer Chris Washington is on his way to spend the weekend with his girlfriend Rose's family. He's a bit uncomfortable. In addition to this being the first time he's met her parents, they're white, and Chris is black. While Rose is quick to defend Chris when they hit a deer on the way to her family's palatial home, the police officer who arrives on the scene treats him with suspicion. Her family is rather over the top. Rose's dad, a neurosurgeon, is quick to declare that he would have voted for Obama a 3rd time if he could have. Also, on the very first night of their visit, Rose's mother, a hypnotherapist, uses a teacup and spoon to hypnotize Chris, sending him to what she calls the sunken place, a kind of subconscious realm of darkness where his cries for help happen only inside. His body is mute and immobile during this process. She wouldn't exactly take no for an answer when she offered the hypnotism session either, which is both strange and overbearing and, of course, an omen of what's coming. Rose's brother is casually racist, but what really unnerves Chris are the family's black staff, Walter and Georgina. Both are strangely distant, and Chris wonders why their reaction to his arrival seems so chilly. Things get stranger still when, at a party for the family's wealthy friends, almost all of them white, Chris notices that one older woman is apparently married to a much younger black man, who is introduced as Logan. When a photo is taken and a camera flash goes off, Logan rushes to Chris and desperately shouts at him to get out. After all this weirdness, Chris is relieved to find that Rose is fine with leaving early. While they talk alone in a patch of woods, an auction, disguised as a game of bingo, goes on back at the house. Chris is the prize, and the winning bidder is a blind man named Jim Hudson, who spoke to Chris at the party about photography and his work as an art dealer. Alone in Rose's room, while preparing to leave, Chris texts his friend Rod, a TSA agent, a photo of Logan. Rod recognizes that Logan is really a man named Andre, who they've both met before. He was kidnapped in Brooklyn in the opening scene of the film. After finding photos of Rose with many other black boyfriends, Chris goes downstairs and insists that Rose give him the keys to the car so he can leave. Of course, she won't. She's not ignorant of her family's plans, but instead is very much a part of them. Rose's mother, once again wielding a teacup, sends Chris back to the sunken place. When Chris regains consciousness, he finds himself restrained in an armchair in the basement. There, a video explains how Rose's family has been transplanting the brains of rich white people into other bodies, we can assume most or all black, so that they can continue living regardless of age or potentially deadly diagnosis. Hudson, the art dealer, explains to Chris that he wants to see the world through his eyes. And once his brain is transplanted into Chris's body, Chris won't be dead exactly. As in Logan's case, some remnant of his consciousness will remain in the sunken place. After being knocked out again, Rose's father comes in to prepare Chris's body for surgery. But we find that in the brief moment he was left alone while conscious, Chris was able to stuff his ears with filling from the armchair. He was only pretending to be unconscious, and once untied, he's able to kill Rose's parents and brother when they attempt to attack and restrain him. Chris escapes the house and hops in the closest car, only to hit Georgina, whose body has been controlled for years by Rose's grandmother. Soon, only Rose and her grandfather, his brain in Walter's body, remain. Chris remembers what happened with Andre at the party and takes a photo with his phone, and the flash of the camera lights up the night. In this moment, Walter is himself again, and he orders Rose to give him the gun. In a fit of filial piety gone wrong, Rose does so, and Walter shoots her, then himself. But then flashing lights appear in the distance, and Rose, badly wounded, calls for help. Chris feels despondent, knowing that the police will believe whatever Rose tells them, only to be surprised by the fact that the car is being driven by his friend Rod, the TSA agent. Rose is left to bleed on the pavement, and the two men drive away, Chris haunted by what he's seen and experienced, while Rod points out that he did try to warn Chris. After all, paranoia isn't paranoia when you're vindicated. This movie is a brilliant, chilling tale, and honestly, it hit me in much the same way that the 2005 film Hostel did. That is, I'm afraid that rich people are already actually doing this somewhere in the world. And of course, by targeting black men, Rose's family manages to get away with many murders. In this fictional world, as in the real one, their deaths are not adequately investigated. Jordan Peele is now a living legend in the world of horror, and this film is where that reputation began. I give this film 3 teacups out of 3. Our book this month is Victor LaValle's Destroyer, also a retelling of Frankenstein. In this graphic novel, a boy named Akai is gunned down by police at just 12 years old. He's walking home from a Little League game, and someone called the police on a black person with a quote-unquote weapon. But Akai's story doesn't end in death. His mother, Dr. Baker, is one of the world's most brilliant scientists, and she has the knowledge and technology necessary to bring her son back to life. However, as Akai's strange new life is just beginning, we learn more about the creature created in the 19th century by the real Victor Frankenstein. Still alive, the creature now calls itself the Destroyer, and it leaves the only home where it has ever known peace, Antarctica, to do what it believes must be done to save the Earth, destroy humanity. But as the Destroyer kills every human he encounters, soon he learns about Akai. Dr. Baker, her son, and Akai's father will have to fight for their lives to stop the Destroyer before he manages to kill them too. Akai, though with visible stitches like the original creature, is only similar to the Destroyer in terms of appearance. Having had the love and support of a family makes him optimistic and empathetic compared to the creature, who had no life of his own before being made from pieces of other dead. Though he died due to police brutality, Akai believes that the corruption of some human systems doesn't justify all of humanity's extermination, and ultimately he succeeds in destroying the would-be destroyer because he has what the creature lacks, the support and guidance of family. Here's another quote from writer-director Bomani J. Story, in which he speaks on reading Frankenstein as a teenager, and how the protagonist, Victor Frankenstein, creates life only to treat his creation as less than human. Quote, "One of the things about Victor that people kind of skip over is at the very beginning of his genesis," Story said. "He loses his mom and all these people at a very young age, and with the destruction of his family, I was just like, this just makes complete sense to me because of these systemic pressures that are twisting my community in so many different ways, just like the story. It just made complete sense for it to kind of be told, or at least inspired by and reformatted for our times, for today." End quote. How life is valued depends very much on where the characters this month find themselves. Vicaria's genius is recognized within her community, but outside it, as with Chris and Get Out, being black means being at the mercy of the white majority, which doesn't understand her struggles. Chris, of course, is isolated specifically so that his body can be stolen, and Rose's family counts on the fact that his disappearance will not make waves. As a black man, he is seen as a potential threat, not a potential victim. Akai, after returning to life, must still fight to keep his second chance at living, and as the graphic novel continues, we see how his mother's brilliance is something that others wish to capitalize on. The idea of selling immortality to the wealthy is, for obvious reasons, a recurring theme in stories like this, but themes like loss and grief are universal, and that's another aspect of why stories like these appeal to us even as they repel. There is something very human in exploring the limits of what a person will do to return a loved one to life, or to save their own life. After all, when we meet Chris, we have no indication that he's ever done anything violent, but in a life-or-death situation, like most of us, he defends himself. Would you trade a stranger's life for yours? Would you experiment on the dead, as Vicaria does, to mend her brother's broken body? I might. Or would you kill someone, steal their body, to maintain a rich and comfortable life? My answer to this question would be no. I don't believe that any amount of wealth would be worth it to me to steal the lives of others. But not everyone feels the same. Life and how we value it cannot be divorced from societal factors, like racism, classism, sexism. And while every human life has intrinsic value, the horrifying truth in both reality and fiction is that the systems in which we live do not reflect life's value. However, Though horror stories like these reflect the dangers of police brutality and racism, they also imagine a world in which Black people survive, their lives intact, and most of those they love alive, at least in some form. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back again soon with another terrifying trio.